Your Honor, I believe she owes me $150 million. I have put my blood and sweat into being with her for 7 years. That money is mine.
Your Honor, Andrew divorced me by 9 a.m., and I went to get groceries by 12:30 p.m. that same day and decided to purchase a lottery ticket on a whim. I won the jackpot of $300 million, and now he is arguing he wants half of the money. How is that even possible?
Half of that money is mine. I have a right to it.
You have no claim. It's ridiculous.
I do. We had an agreement. Order. I will have order in this court.
This is a farce.
Your Honor, I believe she owes me $150 million. That's what Andrew actually said, out loud, in a courtroom, to a judge, after he filed for divorce, after he signed the papers, after he walked out that door at 9 a.m. dreaming about his travel blog and his new life, and his ex-wife became a $300 million lottery winner by lunchtime. 3 hours. That's all it took for karma to clock in, pull up a chair, and absolutely ruin this man's afternoon. He didn't just lose the marriage, he lost a fortune. And instead of quietly taking the L, Andrew sat across from a judge and argued with a straight face that the winning numbers were spiritually connected to their relationship, the wedding date, the proposal, their first date. He tried to turn a quick pick lottery ticket into a love story. The judge was not moved. And there you have it. A $300 million lottery win, a courtroom humiliation, and a woman who walked out of that judge's chambers with every single dollar she deserved. This is what Soul Noir Stories is built on: real power, real reversals, and a deeply satisfying moment when someone who bet against the wrong woman finds out exactly what that cost them. If you live for stories where the scorn come out on top, where loyalty gets its payday and audacity gets its receipt, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. Lying in bed when you should have been asleep 2 hours ago, on your commute pretending to answer emails. Where are my story lovers tuning in from today? Drop your city, your country, your vibe, because I read every single one, and I love knowing who's out there listening.
Hi, I'm not Marcus, I'm West, and I'm one of the writers of Soul Noir Stories. You know we always bring the heat. Enjoy this one.
The ink was still wet when Andrew Calloway pushed back from the courtroom table and straightened his jacket like a man who had just closed the best deal of his life. 9:02 a.m. Judge Richard had signed off on 7 years of marriage in under 4 minutes. No dramatics, no hesitation, just a quiet scratch of a pen and the soft thud of a gavel that sounded to Andrew like the opening note of the rest of his life. He didn't look at Sheila, not once. He had practiced that, the not looking. He'd rehearsed in the mirror of his downtown studio apartment the same way he rehearsed his About Me page for the travel blog he hadn't launched yet. Unbothered, purposeful, a man moving toward something. That was the version of Andrew he was committed to today. His lawyer shook his hand, said something congratulatory. Andrew nodded and smiled the smile of a man who had already mentally booked a one-way flight to Lisbon. Sheila sat still. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in 3 months, not since the night Andrew left a printed list on the kitchen counter, an actual bulleted, printed list of the ways she was limiting his evolution. Number 4 had been your cooking smells too domestic. She'd read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the kitchen drawer next to the takeout menus. Then she'd called her lawyer. Now she watched Andrew shake hands and button his coat and walk toward the courtroom door with the specific energy of a man who believed he was a protagonist of a very compelling story. She let him have it. Her lawyer touched her arm gently. "It's done, Sheila. You're free." She nodded, gathered her bag, exhaled something that had been sitting in her chest since number 4 on that list. Outside, the June morning was warm and unremarkable. The city smelled like exhaust and possibility, the way it always did when something ended and something else hadn't started yet. She had no plans. That was the strange, untethered truth of it. 7 years of building a life around someone else's dreams, and now she stood on the courthouse steps at 9:07 a.m. with a whole day in front of her and not a single obligation in it. Her stomach growled. She almost laughed. The first truly free morning of her adult life, and her body's only comment was "feed me." Fine. She would go to the grocery store. She would buy milk and good bread and something expensive she'd never bought, because Andrew thought specialty items were performative. She would cook something that smelled entirely, unrepentantly domestic. She would eat it alone at her own table and feel no kind of way about it. She walked to her car. The city hummed around her. Somewhere above the skyline, a pigeon launched itself off a ledge and caught an updraft, rising without effort, without looking back. Sheila watched it for a moment. Then she started the engine and pulled into traffic. The store was a kind of unremarkable that Sheila had always found quietly comforting. Fluorescent lights, the faint smell of refrigerated produce, a playlist of songs that existed purely to be ignored. She took her time. That was new. That was intentional. She moved through the aisles without a list, without a timeline, without the low-grade anxiety of needing to be home, before Andrew's mood shifted like weather. She held a jar of truffle salt for 30 seconds. Just because she could, she put in the cart. She picked up good coffee. The real kind, the kind that came in a matte bag with a farm's name printed on it. She picked up flowers. Not a bouquet assembled for an occasion, just a small bunch of something yellow that caught her eye near the entrance. She stood in the cheese aisle for an embarrassing amount of time and felt something close to joy about it. By the time she reached the register, her cart held milk, good bread, truffle salt, expensive coffee, yellow flowers, 2 kinds of cheese, and a bottle of red wine that her lawyer would probably say she'd earned. The cashier was young, early 20s, the kind of bored that suggested she'd been on her feet since before the city was awake. "You want a ticket?" she asked, nodding toward the lottery display beside the register. A handwritten sign. Jackpot. $300 million. Sheila glanced at it. She had never bought a lottery ticket in her life. She didn't gamble. She didn't believe in luck. Or she hadn't, specifically, before 9:02 a.m. today. But it was noon. She was divorced. She had truffle salt in her cart and absolutely nothing to lose. "Sure," she said. Quick pick. The machine hummed. The ticket printed. The cashier tore it off with the practiced indifference of someone who'd handed out 1,000 of them and watched exactly none of them matter. Sheila tucked it into her bag between her receipt and her phone. She loaded her groceries. She drove home with the windows down. The yellow flowers leaning against the passenger seat. The radio playing something she didn't know, but liked immediately. She didn't think about Andrew. She didn't think about the list. She didn't think about the lottery ticket. She thought about what she was going to cook. She thought about eating it slowly, at her own table, in her own quiet. She thought about the pigeon she watched catch the updraft outside the courthouse. No effort, no backward glance, just a clean art of something released into open air. Improbability theory. The odds of winning a major lottery jackpot are roughly 1 in 292 million, statistically closer to being struck by lightning twice than to holding the winning numbers. And yet, every week, someone does. She got home at 12:34 p.m. She put the flowers in a glass on the windowsill. She opened the wine. She started cooking something that smelled warm and deep and entirely domestic, and she didn't apologize to anyone for it. It wasn't until she was halfway through her second glass that she remembered the ticket. She pulled it from her bag, set it on the counter, opened the lottery website on her phone with one hand, her wine in the other, standing in her kitchen in the afternoon light like a woman with nothing particular riding on anything. She checked the numbers. Once, then again, the wine glass hit the counter harder than she intended. She didn't notice. She was already reading the numbers a third time, her hand pressed flat against her chest, her whole body going very, very still. The numbers didn't change. Sheila had read them 4 times now. 5. And they stayed exactly where they were, patient and indifferent, sitting on her phone screen in the kind of silence that precedes something irreversible. $300 million. She set the phone down on the counter, picked it up again, set it down. She walked to the window and looked out at the street below. Ordinary Tuesday afternoon. A man walking a dog. A delivery truck idling at the curb. The world conducting itself with no awareness whatsoever that something seismic had just happened inside her kitchen. She laughed. Not the polished, careful laugh she spent 7 years producing at Andrew's dinner parties. This was something raw, a sound that came from somewhere below her rib cage and surprised even her. It filled the kitchen and bounced off the walls, and she let it, standing there in her socks beside the windowsill flowers, laughing at the sheer, magnificent absurdity of this particular Tuesday. She had woken up this morning a woman, being divorced. It was not yet 1 p.m. She sat down at the table. Her food was still warm. She ate it, slowly, deliberately, the way she promised herself she would, while the number sat on her phone screen and waited. The truffle salt was extraordinary. The wine was good. The kitchen was quiet in the way that only belongs to people who are finally completely alone in their own space. When she finished eating, she called her lawyer. A pause on the line. Then, Sheila, you need to stop talking and listen to me very carefully. There were steps. There were always steps. Sign nothing. Say nothing. Tell no one. Not yet. Not until a claim was verified and the legal architecture was in place. Her lawyer's voice had shifted into a register Sheila had never heard from her before. Focused. Almost reverent. You understand what this means? Her lawyer said. Sheila looked at the yellow flowers on the windowsill. Thought about a printed list on a kitchen counter. Thought about number 4. Yes, she said. I think I do. She hung up and sat for a long moment in her quiet kitchen. In her quiet life, on the other side of the most ordinary errand she had ever run. A grocery run. Milk, bread, truffle salt, and $300 million. She hadn't even used a coupon. She topped off her wine glass. Outside, the delivery truck finally moved. The man with the dog turned the corner and disappeared. The afternoon light shifted across her floor in long gold strips, the way it did in the hour before evening when the city briefly forgot to be loud. Sheila didn't call anyone else. Didn't post anything. Didn't stand at her window, imagining the life ahead of her. Not yet. She simply sat with it, the way you sit with something too large to immediately inhabit. She did allow herself one small, private thing. She opened her phone to Andrew's contact. Didn't call. Didn't text. Just looked at his name for a moment, the way you look at a door you just closed from the other side. No regret, no heat, just a clean, quiet acknowledgement that it was shut. She deleted the contact. Then she finished her wine, washed her glass, and went to bed at a reasonable hour for the first time in years. Subscribe to the channel right now, so you never miss a single second of the cinematic journey. The story is moving fast, and you'll want to be here when the final reckoning hits. Andrew found out on a Thursday. He was in a coffee shop 2 neighborhoods over, the kind of place with exposed brick and a menu written in chalk, working on an opening paragraph of a blog post he'd been trying to write for 11 days. The post was titled, Why I Left Everything to Find Myself, and it was not going well. His espresso was getting cold. The paragraph had 4 words and a blinking cursor. He was staring at his laptop with the expression of a man doing a very convincing impression of someone who was not suffering when the woman at the next table made a sharp sound, half gasp, half laugh, and held up her phone to her friend across from her. This woman won $300 million, and her ex-husband filed for divorce that same morning. Andrew looked up. He didn't mean to. It was instinct. The same instinct that makes you glance at a car crash even when you've decided you're the kind of person who doesn't. The woman's phone screen was too small to read from where he sat, but there was a photo, a woman, a large ceremonial check. Something moved through him that he couldn't immediately name. He opened his own phone, typed into the search bar with the idle curiosity of a man who had absolutely no personal stake in anything. Local lottery winner. June. $300 million. The results loaded. The photo loaded. Andrew Calloway, former husband, aspiring travel blogger, author of a 4-word blog post, set his espresso down very slowly and read the headline 3 times. Sheila Calloway, divorce at 9 a.m., wins $300 million lottery by noon. The coffee shop continued around him. Someone ordered an oat milk latte. The barista called out a name that wasn't his. The chalk menu listed something seasonal involving lavender. Andrew read the article. He read it the way you read something when your brain is processing faster than your face can respond, absorbing, recalculating, running quiet background computations that your expression hasn't caught up to yet. By the 3rd paragraph, he had gone very still. By the 5th, he had closed the laptop. He called his lawyer before he'd finished reading. I need you to look at something, he said. His voice was controlled, measured, the voice of a man who had decided in real time that what he was feeling was not panic, but strategy. His lawyer asked what it was about. Andrew looked at the photo on his screen. Sheila, holding that check, wearing an expression he didn't entirely recognize on her. Composed, unbothered, the particular stillness of someone who had stopped waiting for something and found it had arrived on its own. My ex-wife, he said, and a timeline I think we need to look at very carefully. His lawyer was quiet for a moment. Andrew, just look at the article. He said, call me back. He hung up, ordered another espresso he didn't need, opened his laptop and stared at the forward paragraph he'd been writing for 11 days. He deleted it. In legal proceedings, the burden of proof lies entirely with the claimant, meaning Andrew would need to demonstrate, with documented evidence, that the ticket was purchased before the divorce decree was finalized. A time-stamped receipt, in this context, functions as a legal instrument of singular, devastating precision. Outside, the city moved. Andrew sat very still inside his suddenly complicated Thursday and began constructing, brick by careful brick, the worst idea he would ever have. The lawsuit was 14 pages long. Andrew's lawyer had advised against it. Not quietly, not diplomatically. He'd said it the way doctors deliver bad news, with eye contact and a deliberate absence of softening language. This is not a viable claim. Andrew, the timing alone disqualifies it. Andrew had listened carefully, nodded at the appropriate moments, and then asked him to file it anyway. The legal argument, such as it was, rested on 3 pillars. First, that Sheila had intended to buy the ticket while they were still technically married. The grocery run, Andrew's lawyer wrote with the strained creativity of a man being paid to try, had been conceived within the marital period. Second, that the emotional and psychological foundation of the winning numbers derived from their shared history, making the ticket, in some non-legal but allegedly compelling sense, marital property. Third, that Andrew had contributed materially to Sheila's lottery mindset by exposing her to a lifestyle of spontaneity and risk-taking during their 7 years together. That third one had taken 20 minutes to write and would take approximately 8 seconds for a judge to dismiss. Still, 14 pages. Filed. Official. The story broke on a Friday afternoon, and by Saturday morning it had traveled the specific velocity of internet content that combines money, divorce, and spectacular male audacity into a single headline. It was on 3 news aggregators by noon. By evening, it had a Twitter thread with 40,000 likes, a Reddit post titled, Man Divorces Wife at 9 a.m., sues her for lottery winnings she won at 12 p.m., is somehow surprised this is going badly, and a segment booked on a legal commentary podcast that described Andrew's claim as a fascinating case study in what lawyers call frivolous filing and what the rest of us call a cry for help. Andrew did not have social media notifications turned on. This was, for once, a mercy. Sheila read the coverage from her living room. Her lawyer's number already pulled up on her phone. The yellow flowers on the windowsill replaced now with something larger, an extravagance she permitted herself without ceremony. Her lawyer had called it noise. The filing was noise. The coverage was noise. What mattered was the receipt, the timestamp, and the 4 words that ended every relevant legal conversation about this case. Divorce decree, 9 a.m. Still, she read it all. Not with anger. She'd expected this, or something like it, the moment her lawyer had told her to say nothing publicly. She'd known Andrew would move fast. Fast and loud was his only gear when he felt something slipping. She had watched him operate that way for 7 years. The sudden pivots, the dramatic reframings, the ability to construct a narrative in which he was always the one being wronged. She put the phone down, made tea, stood at her window in the afternoon, quiet. The audacity didn't wound her. That was the thing she hadn't anticipated. That she would read 14 pages of legal argument built on the foundation of their wedding anniversary and feel not fury, not humiliation, but something closer to tired clarity. The clarity of a woman who finally understood completely what she had been married to. She picked her phone back up and texted her lawyer 3 words. Let him come. The courtroom was smaller than Andrew had imagined. He'd built it up in his mind over the 2 weeks between filing and hearing. Vaulted ceilings, a gallery, the ambient drama of a proceeding that matched the scale of what was at stake. What he got was a mid-sized room with dropped ceilings, fluorescent lighting that flattered no one, and a judge who had particular energy of someone who had seen everything and found most of it disappointing. Judge Richard was 61, silver-haired, and read the preliminary filing the way a man reads a menu at a restaurant he already knows he doesn't like. Andrew's lawyer had done what good lawyers do when handed a weak case. He'd built the most presentable version of it possible and prepared his client extensively for the reality that presentable was not the same as winnable. Andrew had absorbed this preparation and then, in the car on the way to the courthouse, decided to supplement the legal strategy with something he called emotional evidence. His lawyer had asked him, with great precision, not to do that. Andrew did it anyway. He stood, when given the floor, and began with the numbers. Specifically, 6, 9, 14, 22, 31, and the Powerball 7. He had a printed sheet. He had highlights. He walked Judge Richard through June 9th, their wedding date, through the 14th, the day he proposed, on a Tuesday, at a restaurant they both agreed was mediocre but had sentimental value, through the 22nd, their first date, through 31, Sheila's age when they married, through 7, the number of years of the marriage itself. He said the word synchronicity twice. He said spiritual cartography once. The courtroom did not have a gallery, but it had a court reporter, a bailiff, and Sheila's lawyer, all of whom achieved the specific stillness of people fighting very hard to maintain professional composure. Judge Richard watched Andrew with an expression that had not moved since the second number. Sheila sat at her table with her hands folded and her face arranged into something neutral and patient. The way you look when you are waiting for a very slow elevator and have nowhere urgent to be. Andrew concluded his numerical argument, straightened his printed sheet, and looked at the judge with the expression of a man who believed he had just delivered something undeniable. Judge Richard looked down at the filing, then back at Andrew. Counselor, he said to Andrew's lawyer, in a tone that suggested the counselor had his sympathies. Is there a documentary component to this claim? Something time-stamped? Andrew's lawyer cleared his throat, mentioned the wedding certificate, mentioned the proposal dinner reservation. He actually found it, a small miracle of legal preparation that deserved better than this case. Mentioned Andrew's personal journal, which contained an entry dated the night before the divorce referencing new beginnings, and he said this part quickly, the energy of shared history carrying forward. Judge Richard blinked once. Then Sheila's lawyer stood, smoothed her jacket, and placed a single document on the bench. 1 page. No highlights. No printed numerology sheet. A grocery store receipt. Timestamp 12:03 p.m., June 9th. Itemized milk, bread, truffle salt, coffee, flowers, 2 cheeses, wine, and 1 quick pick lottery ticket. In cryptography and legal documentation alike, a timestamp is considered among the most tamper-resistant forms of evidence, a fixed, verifiable record that does not negotiate with narrative, sentiment, or spiritual cartography. The courtroom went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something is over, and everyone knows it except one person. Andrew looked at the receipt. The judge looked at Andrew. Smash that subscribe button, and let us know in the comments who you are rooting for. Your support keeps these epic tales coming. So subscribe and join our community today. The receipt sat on the bench in front of Judge Richard like a small, precise verdict that had arrived before he did. He picked it up. Read it without hurry. Set it down. Read it again, not because it was complicated, but in the way that judges sometimes re-examine clean evidence. The way you confirm a door is locked not because you doubt it, but because the finality deserves acknowledgement. 12:03 p.m. June 9th. Milk, bread, truffle salt, coffee, flowers, 2 cheeses, wine, 1 quick pick lottery ticket. The quick pick detail was doing particular work in that courtroom. Andrew had built his entire emotional argument on the architecture of shared numbers, the wedding date, the proposal, the anniversary, the years, the numerological fingerprint of marriage he claimed was woven into those 6 digits. And here, in 12-point font on thermal paper, was a quiet, devastating rebuttal. A computer had chosen those numbers at random, 3 hours and 3 minutes after Andrew Calloway had legally ceased to be Sheila's husband. There was no spiritual cartography. There was an algorithm. Judge Richard set the receipt down and looked at Andrew with the expression of a man who had been on the bench long enough to have developed genuine compassion for people in the process of making catastrophic errors, but not enough patience to pretend the errors weren't catastrophic. Andrew was looking at the receipt. His lawyer was looking at the middle distance with the focused stillness of a man calculating exactly how many billable hours remained in this proceeding and whether any of them would be pleasant. Sheila was looking at her hands. She wasn't performing composure. She was simply composed. There was a difference, and the courtroom felt it. She had not leaned forward when her lawyer placed a receipt on the bench. She had not looked at Andrew when his argument unraveled in real time. She sat with the quiet self-possession of a woman who had stopped needing the room to confirm what she already knew. Her lawyer, however, was not finished. She let the silence do its work for a moment. The particular silence that follows a receipt being read by a judge, and then she stood and addressed the bench with the measured calm of someone who had been looking forward to this specific conversation. The timeline, she said, was not complex. The divorce decree had been finalized at 9 a.m., signed, sealed, witnessed, and entered into the court record. The grocery store was a 12-minute drive from the courthouse. Her client had stopped for fuel. She had arrived at the store at approximately 11:47 a.m. and checked out at 12:03 p.m. The lottery terminal printed the ticket at 12:03 p.m. and 18 seconds. She produced the terminal log. She placed it beside the receipt. 2 documents. No highlights. No spiritual framework. Andrew's lawyer made a quiet sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a word but communicated both. Judge Richard looked at the terminal log, looked at the receipt, looked at Andrew's 14-page filing on the corner of his desk with an expression suggesting it had not improved upon reflection. He asked Andrew's lawyer if there was anything further to submit. There was a pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm there was not. Andrew shifted in his seat. He had the look of a man whose internal narrative was undergoing emergency reconstruction, searching, in real time, for the version of the story in which he was still the protagonist, still the one with legitimate grievance, still the person whom something unfair had been done. He found it. Of course he found it. Andrew had always been gifted at finding it. He leaned toward his lawyer and said something low and urgent, and his lawyer listened with the expression of a man being asked to construct a building out of weather. Then Andrew straightened up, adjusted his jacket, and made the decision that would define the final chapter of his worst idea. He asked the judge for permission to introduce a new line of argument. Judge Richard gave him the floor with the graciousness of a man who had already written his ruling. Sheila's lawyer had a gift for stillness. She stood at the front of that fluorescent-lit courtroom and let Andrew finish his new line of argument, which was, at its core, a repackaging of everything that had come before it, now wrapped in the language of emotional maintenance and psychological contribution to marital wealth. He used a phrase co-architect of her resilience to describe his role in Sheila's life. He argued that his decision to pursue his authentic path had in fact liberated Sheila to become the kind of spontaneous, independent woman who buys lottery tickets on a whim, and that therefore his departure had been, in a meaningful sense, the catalyst for her win. The bailiff coughed once. Sheila's lawyer waited until Andrew's lawyer had finished presenting this argument with the heroic professionalism of a man doing his job under genuinely difficult conditions. Then she stood, smoothed her jacket, and turned to face the bench with the specific energy of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment and had prepared accordingly. She began with the list. Not a metaphor, an actual document. A photograph of an actual printed list entered into evidence, which Sheila had retrieved from a kitchen drawer where she kept it between the takeout menus for 3 months without entirely knowing why. Perhaps she'd known, somewhere beneath the ordinary grief of a marriage ending, that paper remembers things people try to reframe. Item 1 through 6 were read aloud. Item 4, your cooking smells too domestic, landed in the courtroom the way these things do when heard by people who did not previously know they existed. The court reporter's fingers paused for a fraction of a second. The bailiff looked at the ceiling. Judge Richard's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Andrew's lawyer wrote something on his notepad, underlined it. The word, had anyone been able to read it, was damages. Sheila's lawyer continued. She walked the court through 7 years with the precision and economy of someone who had interviewed her client thoroughly and knew which facts needed no embellishment. The fluctuating dreams, travel blogging, then a podcast, then a consulting model that was never to find anyone's satisfaction, including Andrew's. The 2 apartments Sheila had quietly subsidized while Andrew found his footing. The consistent pattern of a woman building a stable life around a man who treated stability as a personal affront. She did not editorialize. She didn't need to. The facts performed their own commentary. Then she arrived at the divorce itself. Andrew had filed. That was not in dispute. He had filed, in his own paperwork, citing irreconcilable differences, which his own initial correspondence to Sheila's lawyer had elaborated on in writing as her resistance to growth and her anchoring energy. He had, in a legally documented communication, described his wife as someone who made him feel landlocked. She read that word aloud. Landlocked. Let it sit. In psychology, this pattern has a name. She continued, pivoting with seamless precision. When one partner systematically reframes the other's stability as a personal obstacle, researchers identify it as a form of relational devaluation, a documented precursor to abandonment in long-term partnerships. She turned to face Andrew directly then, which she hadn't done before. Just for a moment. Not with heat, not with theater, just a clean, level gaze of a woman who had done her homework. Andrew filed for divorce because he believed Sheila was the ceiling of his life, she said. He walked away at 9 a.m. on June 9th confident that he was the one with somewhere better to be. And now, having discovered that the woman he discarded had won $300 million before lunch, he was asking this court to reward him, financially, legally, on the record, for leaving. She picked up the receipt one more time, held it up briefly, set it down. The only thing Andrew Calloway contributed to that lottery ticket, she said, was his absence. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Richard looked at Andrew for a long moment. Not unkindly, but with a particular directness of someone about to say something that could not be softened by delivery. He reached for his pen. If you have been enjoying this story so far, kindly subscribe and hit the notification bell to ensure you're part of the inner circle for every new release. The screen might go black, but the legend continues. Don't miss the next epic story. Judge Richard did not reach for his gavel dramatically. He didn't need to. The room had already arranged itself into the specific silence of a verdict, the kind that settles into a space before it's spoken, the way weather announces itself before it arrives. Everyone in that courtroom knew what was coming. The bailiff knew. The court reporter knew. Andrew's lawyer knew, and had known since the receipt, and possibly since the filing, and if he was being honest with himself, since a phone call where Andrew had first said, I think we need to look at the timeline very carefully. Even Andrew knew. Somewhere beneath the narrative reconstruction, beneath the co-architect of resilience and the spiritual cartography, and the 14 pages of legal argument built on the foundation of a grocery store visit, somewhere under all of it, Andrew Calloway knew. Judge Richard looked at the filing one last time. Then he set it aside with the finality of a man returning a book he had no intention of finishing. He spoke without theater, without flourish, in the measured cadence of someone for whom rulings were not performances, but conclusions. The facts, he said, were not in dispute. The divorce decree had been entered at 9 a.m. on June 9th. The lottery ticket had been purchased at 12:03 p.m. on June 9th. The 3 hours and 3 minutes between those two timestamps represented the entirety of the legal distance between a marriage and its aftermath. And that distance, however inconvenient the petitioner found it, was absolute. He addressed the numerology argument briefly and without mercy. The ticket, he noted, was a quick pick. The numbers had been generated by a machine. The petitioner's claim that those numbers encoded the emotional history of his marriage was not a legal argument. It was, the judge said, with the careful neutrality of a man choosing his words precisely, a narrative. He addressed the catalyst argument, the theory that Andrew's departure had liberated Sheila's spontaneous spirit, with a single sentence. The court does not recognize personal abandonment as a form of financial contribution. Andrew's lawyer wrote something in his notepad and did not look up. Then Judge Richard did something that no one in the room had quite expected. He paused, set his pen down, and looked at Andrew directly, not with contempt, not with the professional distance of a jurist delivering a ruling, but with a particular, unguarded expression of an older man addressing a younger one who is in the process of making a mistake he will carry for a long time. Mr. Calloway, he said, you filed for divorce. You signed the papers. You walked out of this courthouse of your own volition at 9:02 a.m. on June 9th. At that moment, whatever your ex-wife did, earned, found, or built became hers entirely. That is not a technicality. That is the agreement you made when you filed. He let that land. The court finds no legal basis for the petitioner's claim. Case dismissed. The gavel came down once. Clean, unhurried. The sound of a door closing on something that should never have been opened. Andrew sat very still. His lawyer was already closing his notebook. There would be a bill. It would be substantial. It would be paid by a man who had left a marriage to pursue a travel blog that currently had 4 words and a blinking cursor, and who had spent the intervening weeks constructing the most public version of his worst idea, while his ex-wife quietly arranged her extraordinary new life around truffle salt and yellow flowers. Sheila did not look at him. She thanked her lawyer in a low voice, gathered her bag with the unhurried composure of someone who had never doubted the outcome, and walked out of that courtroom the same way she walked out of the last one. Quietly, without ceremony, into particular freedom of a life that belonged entirely to her. Outside, the June afternoon was warm. The city smelled like possibility. She didn't look back. 3 weeks later, Andrew posted the blog. It went up on a Tuesday at 11 a.m., titled still, "Why I Left Everything to Find Myself," though the everything in question was now understood by several 100,000 people to include a woman who had subsequently become one of the wealthiest lottery winners in the state's history. The post had been rewritten 11 times. It ran to 9 paragraphs. It did not mention Sheila by name. It mentioned twice the concept of radical self-authorship. It received 46 views. 31 of them were from people who had found it by searching his name in connection with the court case. The comments were not kind. He turned them off after 4 hours. Sheila, on that same Tuesday, was in a private aviation lounge at the airport. She had a window seat on a flight departing at 2 p.m. in her carry-on. Her passport, 2 books she'd been meaning to read for years, the good headphones she'd never bought because Andrew thought premium audio equipment was conspicuous, and a small notebook she'd purchased a morning after courtroom with no specific plan for it. Just a quiet, open intention of a woman who had space now to think in. Her phone had 17 unread messages from journalists. She had read none of them. Her lawyer handled those. Her lawyer handled most things now, which was an arrangement Sheila found so deeply restorative she occasionally thought about it with something close to gratitude. She ordered a coffee. The good kind. The kind that came in a ceramic cup on a small saucer. The kind that arrived without her having to justify wanting it. She thought about Lisbon. Andrew had talked about Lisbon for 2 years. It had lived in their marriage as a symbol. His symbol, specifically, for the life he was meant to be living instead of the one he had. He'd said the word with a particular inflection, a kind of longing that was really just dissatisfaction wearing a destination's name. Sheila wasn't going to Lisbon. She was going somewhere warmer. Somewhere she'd chosen herself from a list she'd made alone at her kitchen table one morning with good coffee and no one else's restlessness in the room. The choice had taken 11 minutes. It had felt extraordinary, not the destination, but the 11 minutes. The clean, uncomplicating simplicity of wanting something and simply deciding to have it. Her flight was called. She gathered her bag, walked to the lounge in the unhurried way she'd been relearning. The walk of a woman with time, with options, with a window seat on a plane, to somewhere she'd chosen entirely for herself. She thought about the morning it had all started. The courthouse steps, the pigeon catching the updraft, the grocery store with its fluorescent lights and its bored cashier and its lottery display with a handwritten sign, the machine that had hummed and printed a ticket she'd tucked between a receipt and her phone, without ceremony or expectation, in the study of transformative life events. Psychologists note that the moments that change everything rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as ordinary Tuesdays, unremarkable, unhurried, indistinguishable from any other morning until suddenly they aren't. She boarded the plane, found her seat, settled in, opened one of the books she'd been meaning to read. Outside the window, the tarmac stretched flat and gray in the afternoon light, and then the engines came up and the world began to move, and then she was airborne, rising without effort, without drama, without a single backward glance at the runway. Below, the city arranged itself into familiar geometry of somewhere she was leaving, streets and rooftops and the small, ordinary life of a Tuesday, going about its business with no awareness of what had happened inside it. Sheila read her book. Andrew, at that precise moment was refreshing his blog analytics. The comment section was still off. The view count had not moved. Outside his window, his city, the same city, a different longitude of it, went about its Tuesday with the same indifference it extended to everyone who had, at some point, believed they were a protagonist. He closed the laptop, sat for a long time, in particular quiet, a man who wanted the wrong thing so loudly that the right ones had simply picked up their carry-on and boarded a flight without him. Somewhere above the clouds, Sheila turned a page. If you have enjoyed this story so far, kindly subscribe and hit the notification bell to ensure you're part of the inner circle for every new release. Tell me your favorite part of the story and why you think it's the best. I'd be in the comments section watching and replying to all your messages.